Some people were meant to change the world in big, flashy ways. Others, like him, did it one careful inspection, one safety improvement, one saved flight at a time. And that, he finally knew, was more than enough. It was exactly who he was meant to be. 3 weeks after the emergency landing, Alex sat in his favorite coffee shop near the airport, reading the safety report that had finally been released. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the steam from his coffee cup. The shop's owner had refused to let him pay for his drinks ever since the incident, no matter how many times Alex insisted he was just doing his job. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Another story about the landing had gone viral, this time focusing on the young mother and baby he helped calm during the descent. These stories kept popping up, each one revealing a different passenger's perspective of that day. Is this seat taken? Alex looked up to find Priya standing there, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, more like the woman he'd married than the polished socialite he'd seen on the plane. She held a paper cup from the same coffee shop. Please, he gestured to the empty chair, closing the report. I didn't know you were still in town. We delayed our return to Leh, she said, sitting down. Rage has been rethinking some things since the flight. Actually, we both have. Alex noticed she wasn't wearing her usual expensive jewelry, just her grandmother's silver chain. How's he doing? Better. The experience changed him a bit. She smiled slightly. He started taking flying lessons, if you can believe it. Says he wants to understand what you were talking about up there. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind they used to share during their morning coffees years ago. Through the window, they could see planes taking off from the nearby airport, climbing steadily into the clear sky. I saw your interview on the morning news, Priya said finally. The one about improving airline safety protocols. You were amazing, clear, passionate, but not trying to be a hero, just being yourself. Alex shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. I just hope they actually implement the changes. That engine problem could have been caught earlier if... And that's exactly why I fell in love with you back then, Priya interrupted softly. You never cared about the spotlight. Only about making things better, keeping people safe. The words hung between them, delicate as spider silk. Alex stirred his coffee, gathering his thoughts. I got offered a big promotion, he said finally. The airline wants me to head their entire safety division. Better pay, corner office, the works. That's wonderful. Priya's smile was genuine. You deserve it. And you going to take it? I am, but not the office part. I told them I need to keep doing hands-on inspections, actually flying with crews. They agreed. He looked at her directly. I learned something too, that day on the plane. About being true to who you are. Priya nodded, understanding. Raj and I are seeing a counselor, she said quietly. Not because of the flight, exactly. But it made us realize we need to be honest about what we really want from life, from each other. Outside, another plane roared overhead. Alex remembered all the times they'd watched planes together, dreaming of their future. They'd been so young, so sure of everything. I'm glad you found me that day, Priya said, standing up. Not because you saved the flight, though I'm obviously grateful for that too. She smiled, touching her grandmother's chain. But because it helped me remember something I'd forgotten. Sometimes the biggest adventures aren't about going new places or meeting important people. Sometimes they're about finding your way back to who you really are. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Raj and I are starting a foundation for aviation safety education, helping train new pilots. We'd love your input as a consultant. No strings attached, just your expertise. Alex took the envelope, touched by the gesture. I'd like that. As Priya turned to leave, she paused. You know, for years I thought I left because I wanted more excitement in my life. But watching you that day, so focused, so sure of your purpose, I realized that what I really wanted was to feel that certain about my own path. Have you found it? Alex asked gently. I'm getting there, she said. We all are, I guess, one flight at a time. After she left, Alex opened his safety report again, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about parts taken and not taken, about the strange way life had of bringing things full circle. Outside, planes continued their careful dance through the sky, each one carrying people on their own journeys of discovery. His phone buzzed again, another airline requesting his consultation services. Alex smiled, finished his coffee, and stood up. There was work to be done, lives to protect, and for the first time in years, he felt completely at peace with where his path had led him. The small airport's terminal buzzed with activity as passengers huddled in groups, sharing their stories with family members who had rushed to meet them. Emergency response teams checked everyone for injuries, while airline officials moved through the crowd, answering questions about replacement flights and lost luggage. Alex sat quietly in a corner, finishing his incident report. He'd already spent 2 hours talking with the airport authorities and airline investigators, walking them through every decision made during the crisis. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from news outlets seeking interviews. Still doing paperwork, Pryor's voiced Megan look up. She held 2 cups of coffee, offering him one. Some things never change. He accepted the coffee with a small smile. Old habits. How's everyone holding up? Shaken but grateful. She sat down beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. Raj is outside making calls, trying to arrange private transportation to LA for us. She paused, stirring her coffee. He offered to get you a ride too if you want. Alex shook his head. Thanks, but I need to stay here until the investigation team arrives from headquarters. Besides, he added with a hint of his old humor, I've had enough excitement for one day. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, approached them shyly, her mother standing a few steps behind. Are you the pilot who saved us? She asked Alex. I just helped out, Alex replied gently. The whole crew worked together to keep everyone safe. The girl's mother stepped forward. My daughter was so scared, but she said watching you stay calm helped her be brave too. She touched Alex's shoulder. Thank you. We'll never forget what you did today. After they left, Pryor was quiet for a moment. You always did that, she said finally. Gave credit to others, played down your own role. It's the truth, Alex said, but he could feel the weight of her gaze. I've been thinking about what Raj asked on the plane, she said suddenly, about what went wrong with us. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. I never gave you a real answer, did I? Just packed my bags and said I needed more from life. Alex's pen stopped moving across the paper. Pryor, we don't have to. I think I do, she interrupted. When I said I needed more, I thought I meant bigger things, fancy parties, important people, a life that looked perfect from the outside. She glanced toward the terminal entrance where Raj was visible through the glass, still on his phone. But today, watching you up there, being exactly who you've always been, I realized something. A commotion near the terminal entrance drew their attention. News crews had arrived, cameras and microphones ready. An airline official was already heading their way, probably to ask Alex for a statement. What did you realize? Alex asked quietly, before the moment could slip away. Pryor stood up, smoothing her designer dress with slightly shaky hands. That sometimes more actually means less. Less pretense, less proving something to the world. She smiled sadly. Less running from who you really are. The airline official reached them. Mr. Kumar? The press would like a statement about today's events. And sir, the CEO would like to speak with you personally about a potential position in our safety department. Alex nodded, gathering his papers. As he stood, Pryor touched his arm lightly. For what it's worth, she said softly, I'm glad it was you on that plane today. Not because you saved us, but because it reminded me of who I used to be too. Before Alex could respond, Raj appeared beside them. The car's here, he told Pryor, then turned to Alex with newfound respect. The offer for a ride still stands, and I'd like to talk to you about consulting for my aviation division, if you're interested. Thank you, Alex said sincerely, but I think I'll stay with the airline work. It's where I belong. As he watched them walk away, Pryor's hand resting lightly on Raj's arm, Alex felt something shift inside him. For 5 years, he'd carried the weight of their failed marriage like extra cargo. But today, seeing her look at him with pride instead of regret, something had changed. The airline official cleared his throat politely. Sir? The press is waiting. Alex gathered his thoughts, ready to face the cameras and tell the story of their emergency landing. But in his mind, he was already thinking about his next flight, his next safety inspection, his next chance to do what he did best. Some people were meant for glittering parties and perfect photos. He was meant for this, keeping people safe, doing the quiet work that mattered. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like more than enough. Raj stood too, extending his hand to Alex. I may have misjudged you," he said quietly. The words seemed to cost him something, but they were sincere. Alex shook his hand briefly, then turned to help an elderly passenger with the seatbelt. There would be time for conversations later. Right now, people needed him to be the calm, capable person he'd always been. As he guided passengers toward the emergency exits, he caught fragments of phone calls already being made. "You won't believe what just happened. We're safe, but oh my God. This pilot, The story was already spreading, but Alex didn't care about that. Everyone was alive. That was all that mattered. The descent was steeper than anyone would have liked, but they had no choice with just one working engine. In the cabin, flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, checking seatbelts and helping passengers assume the brace position. The plane's shadow raced across fields and roads below, growing larger as they dropped altitude. "How can you be so calm?" Raj asked Priya, his own knuckles white on the armrests. The businessman's usual confidence had evaporated in the face of a situation his wealth couldn't control. Priya adjusted her oxygen mask, her voice quiet but steady. "'Cause I've seen him do the impossible before. During our 3rd year of marriage, his squadron got caught in a sandstorm during a rescue mission. Alex was the only pilot who managed to land safely and get everyone out." The memory caught in her throat. She'd been so proud of him that day, but it was also when things started changing between them. His dedication to duty meant long separations, missed anniversaries, quiet dinners alone. She told herself she wanted more from life, but watching him now, she wondered if she really understood what more meant. In the cockpit, Alex worked in perfect sync with the flight crew. His military training merged seamlessly with their commercial experience as they prepared for the most challenging landing of their careers. "Flaps at 15, the captain called out, running on minimal hydraulics." "Copy that," Alex responded, his eyes darting between instruments. "We'll need to come in hot. We won't get a second chance at this." The co-pilot's voice crackled through the radio to the ground crew, emergency vehicles standing by, runway foamed and ready. The regional airport's single runway appeared ahead, a gray strip cutting through green fields. Fire trucks lined the tarmac, their lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Alex could see the foam they'd sprayed across the runway, a precaution in case the landing gear failed. A sudden gust of wind rocked the aircraft, and warning alarms blared through the cockpit. The remaining engines struggled to compensate, whining under the strain. "We're too high," the captain said tensely. "We need to lose altitude fast or we'll overshoot." Alex's mind raced through options, remembering an old Air Force technique. Permission to try something unconventional. The captain glanced at him, then at their rapidly approaching runway. "Granted, just get us down in one piece." Alex took the co-pilot's controls. "Everybody hold on. This might feel a bit unusual." He began a controlled side slip, a maneuver that would help them lose altitude quickly without gaining speed. The plane tilted, and he heard gasps from the cabin. In their seats, Priya instinctively grabbed Raj's hand. She knew this feeling. It was one of Alex's signature moves that he told her about during their late-night talks. Back then, she'd loved hearing his flying stories, even if she hadn't fully understood them. 500 feet, called out the co-pilot. 400, 300. The runway rushed up to meet them. Alex could feel the whole aircraft shuddering, fighting him as he kept it in the slip. At just the right moment, he leveled the wings, lining up with the center line. "Brace for landing." The captain's voice boomed through the cabin speakers. The touchdown was hard. It had to be with their speed and limited control. The landing gear screamed against the pavement as the pilots deployed every braking system they had. Foam sprayed up around them as they sped down the runway, the one working engine reversing thrust at maximum power. For a moment that felt like forever, nobody knew if they would stop in time. The end of the runway approached too quickly, a grass field and drainage ditch waiting beyond it. Then, finally, incredibly, they began to slow. The plane shuddered to a stop just 200 feet from the runway's end, immediately surrounded by emergency vehicles. In the sudden silence, broken only by the hiss of emergency slides deploying, Alex heard something unexpected from the cabin: applause. It started slowly, then built into a thunderous celebration of relief and gratitude. He helped the flight crew shut down the remaining systems, then made his way back to check on the passengers. The flight attendants were already organizing an evacuation, but everyone was safe. No injuries beyond a few bruises. As he passed their row, Priya stood up suddenly, ignoring Raj's surprised look. Without a word, she hugged Alex tightly. He could feel her trembling slightly, and for just a moment, he let himself remember how perfectly they used to fit together. "Thank you," she whispered, then stepped back quickly, composing herself. The cockpit door opened to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Warning lights flashed across the instrument panel like angry fireflies, and the altitude display was dropping faster than Alex liked. Both pilots were fighting with the controls, their faces tense behind their oxygen masks. "Huma?" "The Air Force guy." The captain's voice was strained but professional. "We've lost primary control of the left engine, and the backup systems aren't responding. The pressure loss is spreading to the cabin." Alex scanned the instruments quickly, his mind automatically sorting through years of training and experience. "Have you tried bypassing the main electrical system?" "Twice," the co-pilot answered. "Nothing. Whatever's wrong, it's mechanical, not electrical." Another violent shudder rocked the plane. Alex grabbed the back of the captain's seat to stay upright. Through the cockpit window, he could see the damaged engine starting to smoke. "We need to shut down the left engine completely," Alex said, pointing to a specific readout. "Look at the vibration pattern. It's going to tear itself apart if we don't." The captain hesitated. "With one engine, we'll lose too much altitude too fast." "With an exploding engine, we'll lose the whole plane," Alex countered. His voice remained calm, the same tone he used teaching new pilots. "I've seen this before. Trust me." Back in the cabin, Priya watched the cockpit door, remembering all the times she'd waited for Alex during his military deployments. Raj noticed her anxiety and tried to hold her hand, but she was too focused on the door to respond. "He'll figure it out," she said, more to herself than to Raj. "He always does." Raj adjusted his oxygen mask uncomfortably. "I have some connections at the FAA. When we land, I can make sure." "Not everything can be fixed with money and connections." Priya cut him off, surprising them both with her sharpness. In the cockpit, Alex and the pilots worked quickly, their movements coordinated like a well-practiced dance. The captain gave the order to shut down the failing engine, and Alex guided them through the emergency procedures he'd reviewed countless times in simulators. "We need to find an emergency landing site," the co-pilot said, scanning their navigation system. "We're too far from any major airports." Alex leaned over the console, studying the map. "There," he pointed to a smaller airport. "It's a regional field, but I've landed there before. The runway's long enough, and it's within our glide range if we start our approach now." The captain nodded, already radioing air traffic control. The response crackled back through their headsets. The airport was clearing all traffic for their emergency landing. Returning to the cabin, Alex found the flight attendants trying to keep passengers calm. Some were crying, others praying, a few filming with their phones. He caught Priya's questioning look and gave her a subtle nod, their old signal that things were under control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice cutting through the panic. "I'm Alex Kumar, former Air Force pilot and aviation safety consultant. We're experiencing engine trouble, but we have a plan. We're diverting to a nearby airport for an emergency landing. I need everyone to stay calm and follow the crew's instructions exactly." A young mother clutching her baby looked up at him. "Are we going to be okay?" Alex met her eyes steadily. "I've handled situations like this before. The crew is highly trained, and we're taking every precaution. Right now, I need everyone to check their seatbelts are tight and review the brace position in your safety cards." His confidence seemed to spread through the cabin, calming the worst of the panic. As he moved through the aisle, checking on passengers, he heard Raj say quietly to Priya, "He's good at this." "He always was," Priya replied. "It's who he is." The plane banked slowly, lining up for their approach. They were flying lower now, the ground features becoming clearer below them. Alex returned to the cockpit, ready to assist with the most critical part of their journey. "We've got one shot at this," the captain said as Alex strapped into the jump seat. "The runway's going to come up fast, and with one engine, our margin for error is practically zero." Alex nodded, his mind already running through every emergency landing he'd ever practiced or performed. Sometimes zero margin is all you need, he said, his hands ready on the backup controls. Let's bring them home. The flight attendant arrived at Alex's seat, her professional smile masking concern at his serious expression. Is everything all right, sir? Could you ask the captain if they're monitoring the left engine vibration? Alex kept his voice low, not wanting to alarm other passengers. I'm an aviation safety consultant, and something doesn't feel right. Raj let out a short laugh. Always the worrier, aren't you? The weather report showed clear skies all the way to Leh. But Priya had gone quiet, watching Alex's face. She'd seen that look before, back when they were married. The night he'd insisted on evacuating their apartment building because he smelled something off in the gas lines. Everyone had complained. Until the fire department found the leak that could have killed them all. The plane shuddered again, harbor this time. Coffee cups rattled on tray tables, and a few passengers looked up from their books and screens. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, steady but tight. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Alex's eyes stayed fixed on the wing outside his window. The subtle flutter he'd noticed earlier had become more pronounced. He pulled out his phone, quickly typing notes about what he was observing. Old military habit, document everything. It's just turbulence, Raj said, but his hand had found Priya's on their shared armrest. These things happen all the time. A loud bang shook the aircraft, followed by a grinding sound that made Alex's blood run cold. The plane lurched to the left, and someone in the back of the cabin screamed. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling panels, swaying like yellow plastic ghosts. Put them on, Alex commanded, his voice cutting through the rising panic. Reg, help Priya with hers first, then put on your own. The military training kicked in automatically, clear, direct instructions in a crisis. Priya's hands shook as she reached for her mask, and Alex saw fear flash across Raj's usually confident face. Around them, other passengers scrambled to follow the safety instructions they'd ignored just hours ago. The cabin pressure was dropping. Alex could feel it in his ears. He pressed the flight attendant button again, more urgently this time. When she rushed over, her own mask in place, he spoke quickly. I need to speak with the captain. Now. Tell him Alex Kumar, former Air Force pilot, 20 years of flight experience. Sir, I can't. Another violent shake cut her off. The plane was descending rapidly now, and Alex could see the engine casing starting to come loose. They had minutes, maybe less. Look at the left engine, he said firmly. They need help up there, and I can give it. Now. The flight attendant hesitated, then nodded sharply and hurried toward the cockpit. Priya reached across the aisle, her hand finding Alex's arm. Her fingers were cold. Just like old times, she said through her mask, trying to smile. You seeing trouble before anyone else. I really wish I was wrong this time, Alex replied, squeezing her hand briefly before letting go. Raj watched this exchange silently, his usual smugness replaced by something that looked almost like respect. The plane dropped again, and he grabbed both armrests, knuckles white. The flight attendant returned, moving against the tilted floor of the cabin. The captain wants to see you. Now. Alex unbuckled his seatbelt, bracing himself against the seats as he stood. He looked at Priya one last time, seeing in her eyes the same trust he'd seen years ago whenever things got rough. Fix it, she said simply. You always do. As Alex made his way to the cockpit, he could hear passengers praying, crying, calling loved ones. The plane's warnings blared through the cabin, mechanical voices announcing what he already knew. They were in serious trouble. But trouble was where Alex did his best work. He'd learned that in the Air Force, refined it in his consulting work, and now, with the lives of everyone aboard in the balance, he was ready to prove it again, even if it meant saving the man who had everything he'd lost and the woman who had chosen that life over their own. An hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign finally turned off with a gentle ding. Alex tried to focus on his laptop screen, but the familiar scent of jasmine, Priya's signature perfume, kept pulling him back to memories he'd worked hard to bury. He noticed she still wore the small silver chain her grandmother had given her, a detail that somehow made his chest tighten. So, you're still consulting? Priya's voice broke through the ambient hum of the engines. She'd removed her designer jacket, revealing a simple blue blouse that reminded him of the ones she used to wear when they were married. "Yeah," Alex replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Someone has to keep these planes in the sky." It was their old joke. She used to tease him about being overly cautious about everything. Raj looked up from his tablet, his expensive watch catching the cabin light. "My company actually owns a fleet of private jets, much more reliable than commercial flights." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Though I suppose not everyone has that option." Alex bit back a sharp response. Instead, he thought about what his old flight instructor used to say: "The sky doesn't care how much money you have when things go wrong." The flight attendant approached with drinks, still sparkling water with lime. Pryor asked Alex before he could order. The fact that she remembered such a small detail after 5 years made something shift in the air between them. "You remember," Alex said softly. "Some habits are hard to forget," she replied, then quickly turned away, fiddling with her tablet. Rage cleared his throat. "Honey, did you finalize the arrangements for the charity gala next week?" The governor's wife confirmed she's attending. He spoke just loudly enough for Alex to hear, his hand resting possessively on Pryor's arm. Alex watched as Pryor's expression changed, a subtle tightening around her eyes that he recognized from their own marriage, when she was pretending to be interested in something she wasn't. Some things hadn't changed. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, making the overhead bins rattle. Most passengers barely noticed, but Alex's trained senses picked up something off about the way the aircraft handled the bump. The slight vibration in the floor didn't feel quite right. Still analyzing every little shake, Pryor asked, noticing his frown. There was a gentleness in her voice that caught him off guard. "You always could feel things others couldn't." "Old habits," Alex echoed her earlier words, managing a small smile. Raj put down his tablet, finally giving them his full attention. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, what exactly went wrong with you two? Pryor never really talks about it." The question landed like a stone in still water. A flight attendant dropped a napkin nearby, and the soft flutter seemed louder than the engines. "Raj, please," Pryor whispered, her cheeks flushing. "This isn't the time or place." But Alex could see the genuine curiosity in Raj's eyes behind the subtle challenge. He remembered reading about the man's business tactics, always direct, sometimes uncomfortably so. Before Alex could respond, the plane shuddered again. This time, he definitely felt something wrong in the vibration. His eyes moved to the window, studying the wing's movement. The other passengers continued their conversations, unaware, but Alex's military training was screaming that something wasn't right. Pryor must have remembered his expressions well enough because she leaned forward slightly. "Alex, what is it?" "Probably nothing," he said, but his hand was already reaching for the flight attendant call button. He could feel Raj's skeptical gaze and Pryor's concerned one, both watching him as the subtle shaking continued beneath their feet. The plane banked slightly to the left, and Alex caught a glimpse of the engine. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Sometimes he hated being right. The bustling airport terminal at JFK was packed with the usual Monday morning crowd. Alex Kumar adjusted his worn leather laptop bag as he made his way through security, his mind focused on the consulting work waiting for him in Los Angeles. After 15 years as an Air Force pilot and now 5 years as a commercial airline safety consultant, airports had become his second home. He pulled his carry-on behind him, remembering the days when Pryor used to tease him about always packing so light. "One day, you'll learn to pack like a normal person," she'd say, dragging her oversized suitcase for even the shortest trips. A small smile crossed his face at the memory, but it quickly faded. Those days were long gone now. The boarding process for Flight AA-273 was already underway when Alex reached the gate. As he walked down the jet bridge, he mentally reviewed his presentation for tomorrow's client meeting. The airline industry had finally started taking his safety recommendations seriously, and he couldn't afford any distractions. But fate had other plans. Alex stopped dead in his tracks as he entered the business class cabin. There, in seat 3A, was Pryor, his ex-wife. 5 years had passed since their divorce, but he'd recognize her anywhere. She looked different now: designer clothes, expensive jewelry, perfectly styled hair. Nothing like the young journalist he'd married 12 years ago when they were both just starting out. She wasn't alone. Next to her sat Raj Malhotra, her new husband. Alex had never met him, but he'd seen enough photos in the business magazines. Real estate mogul, tech investor, listed among the country's top entrepreneurs. The kind of man who never had to check price tags. Alex considered asking the flight attendant for a seat change, but his practical nature won out. It was a 6-hour flight, and his assigned seat was perfect for reviewing his work. He'd just keep to himself. The universe, however, seemed to have a twisted sense of humor. As Alex stored his carry-on in the overhead compartment, his laptop bag slipped, sending his water bottle rolling right toward Priya's feet. She picked it up, and their eyes met. Alex saw the flash of recognition, followed by surprise, then something else he couldn't quite read. Was it embarrassment? Nostalgia? He noticed she still had that small habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when caught off guard. "Thank you," he said politely, taking the water bottle. Raj looked up from his tablet, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to curiosity as he noticed the tension between them. "Alex," Priya said softly, "I didn't expect. How have you been?" Before he could answer, the flight attendant called his name. "Mr. Kumar? There seems to be a problem with your seat assignment." Alex turned, grateful for the interruption, only to learn that the entertainment system at his assigned seat wasn't working. The only available alternative was the seat right across the aisle from Priya and Braj. As he settled into his new seat, Alex couldn't help but appreciate life's sense of irony. Here he was, sitting across from the woman who'd left him because she wanted more from life, and the man who could give her everything he couldn't. The same water bottle that had rolled toward Priya now sat in his seat pocket, the Air Force logo still visible through the worn sticker, a reminder of the life they'd once shared. The cabin crew began their safety demonstration, and Alex noticed Raj pull out a pair of expensive noise-canceling headphones, clearly planning to work through the flight. Priya, meanwhile, kept stealing glances in Alex's direction when she thought he wasn't looking. Little did any of them know that this awkward reunion was about to become the least of their concerns. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Alex's trained eye caught something subtle in the engine's sound, a slight irregularity that most passengers would never notice, but one that made his safety consultant instincts tingle. He pulled out his phone for one last message before takeoff, sending a quick note to his colleague about the client meeting tomorrow. As the plane lifted off the ground, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this flight would be anything but routine. The real question was, after 5 years of silence, what could he possibly say to the woman who had once been his whole world?